It's funny how certain moments in life can change everything. One minute, things are going fine, you're just going about your day, and then in a single moment, everything flips upside down. I never thought something like this would happen to me. But looking back, I can't help but wonder if I had ignored something I shouldn't have. I don't even know where to begin, but I suppose the best place to start is right here, with my stepson. It all started one evening. I was in the living room, reading a book, when I heard a knock on my bedroom door. My stepson, Jesse, stood there looking a little flustered. He wasn't the type to ask for help, but that day he did. "Hey, can you help me with something?" he asked hesitantly. I wasn't sure what he needed, but I told him to come in. "I need you to fix my belt," he said, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. At first, I didn't think much of it. It was a simple request, after all. Jesse wasn't a kid anymore, he was in his early 20s, but still, something about his request felt different. Maybe it was the way he was acting too casually, or the way his gaze lingered on me a second longer than usual. I brushed the thought aside. "Sure," I said, stepping closer. "Let me see." As I reached out to adjust his belt, his pants shifted slightly. Not much, but enough for me to notice. My heart raced for no apparent reason. Maybe he was just uncomfortable, or maybe it was just my imagination. Then he looked at me, really looked at me. There was something in his eyes, a kind of tension that hadn't been there before. His usual laid-back demeanor had changed into something else, something unreadable. I wanted to pull away, but for a brief moment, I hesitated. Then, just like that, the moment passed. "Thanks," Jesse said, his voice barely above a whisper. His hand brushed against mine as he stepped back. "I appreciate it." Something about that moment lingered in the air, a strange feeling neither of us addressed. And that was just the beginning. Over the next few days, things felt different. I tried to convince myself that I was overthinking, that it was nothing. But every time I saw Jesse, I felt that same tension again. It wasn't just the way he had looked at me that day, it was the way he seemed to be around more often, appearing unexpectedly. His presence felt closer, his tone more familiar than before. And his eyes, they followed me, as if he were studying me, trying to figure something out. Maybe I was just imagining it. After all, he was my stepson, I had known him since he was young. There were clear boundaries between us. At least, I thought there were. Then, one evening, it happened again. I was in the kitchen, finishing up dinner, when I heard footsteps behind me. Expecting to see my husband, I turned around. It was Jesse. "Hey, can I talk to you for a second?" he asked, his voice slightly strained. I set down the dish I was holding and wiped my hands on a towel. "What's up?" I asked. He hesitated, glancing around as if making sure no one else was nearby. "I just wanted to say thanks again for the other day. It was kind of awkward, you know? And I didn't want you to think, I don't know. Maybe I was overthinking things. Maybe I was making something out of nothing." Jesse stood in front of me, shifting his weight uncomfortably. He glanced at the floor, his usual confidence replaced by something hesitant. "You know, the whole belt thing," he finally said. My stomach tightened at the mention of it. I had been trying to forget about that moment, to push it to the back of my mind. But now, here it was again. I could feel my face warm slightly, though I wasn't sure why. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "Jesse, it was no big deal." "I'm sure you were just." "I just don't want you to feel uncomfortable," he interrupted. His voice was softer now, uncertain. "I mean, I don't know. Maybe it was weird. But for some reason I felt like we were close. Closer than I expected." There was a pause. He let out a small, nervous laugh. I don't even know how to explain it. Maybe I'm just messing things up. For a moment, I almost believed his uncertainty. He sounded sincere, like he genuinely wasn't sure how to navigate whatever he was feeling. But there was something in the way he said it, something subtle, something off. It felt like he was testing the waters, pushing the boundaries ever so slightly. Or maybe I was imagining it. I inhaled slowly, keeping my expression neutral. "Jesse, don't worry about it. I'm not uncomfortable. It was just a small thing. Nothing more." He nodded, relief flashing across his face. "Okay, good. I just didn't want things to be weird between us." I forced a smile. They're not. But as I said it, a strange feeling lingered in the air. I wanted to brush it off, to convince myself that everything was normal. But deep down, I wasn't sure anymore. That night, as I lay in bed, I found myself replaying the conversation in my mind. His voice, the way his hand had brushed mine, the way he had looked at me. It all felt intentional. Like he was testing something, waiting to see if I would react. The thought unsettled me. Days passed, but the tension between Jesse and me only grew. I tried to tell myself it was all in my head, but I couldn't ignore the way his presence felt heavier now. The way he lingered in rooms longer than before. The way he looked at me, not just in passing, but like he was watching, studying. It was subtle. So subtle that I almost convinced myself it wasn't real. But then one evening it happened again. My husband was out of town for a business trip, leaving Jesse and me alone in the house. That wasn't unusual. We had spent time alone before. But something about this time felt different. I was in the living room, watching TV, when Jesse walked in. He was holding a book, but his eyes weren't on the pages. They were on me. "Hey," he said, sitting down on the couch beside me. Too close. Closer than usual. I glanced at him briefly before turning my attention back to the screen. "Hi." There was a pause. I could feel his presence next to me, a quiet weight in the room. "Can I ask you something?" His voice was quieter now, more deliberate. I turned my head slightly, trying to read his expression.
Sure.
"What's up?" He hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know if I should be asking this, but I've been thinking about something. Something that happened before." A cold sensation ran down my spine. I knew exactly what he was referring to. I kept my expression neutral. "What about it?" Jesse let out a small sigh, his fingers tapping against the spine of his book. I don't know. I don't want you to think I'm weird or anything, but ever since that day, I can't stop thinking about it." His voice dropped slightly.
About you.
The room felt smaller all of a sudden. I gripped the edge of my sleeve, willing myself to stay calm. This wasn't just subtle anymore. It was real, and I wasn't sure what to do about it. He paused, his eyes locking onto mine. "You make me feel safe," he said, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. "Like I can talk to you about things. I don't know if that makes sense." His words hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. Suddenly, the room felt 10 degrees hotter. My heart pounded, my thoughts scrambled, and I had no idea what to say. This wasn't just about a belt anymore. This wasn't just about him asking for help. He was saying things that crossed a line, not physically but emotionally, mentally. I forced a laugh, trying to brush it off. "Jesse, you're overthinking this." It was nothing really. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew they weren't true. Because in that moment it was something. Something more than I was willing to admit. More than I was ready to face. He leaned in slightly, and the scent of his cologne wrapped around me. My heart pounded. My mind raced. What was he doing? Why was he acting like this? "I know it probably sounds crazy," he said, his voice soft and uncertain. "But I feel like we have a connection. Like maybe we're more alike than you think. And I don't want to feel guilty about it. I just want to know you better." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I couldn't breathe. I had to pull away. I needed distance. "Jesse," I said, my voice unsteady. "We can't. This isn't something we can talk about. It's not right." He immediately backed off, regret flashing across his face. "Sorry," he muttered. "I didn't mean to make things weird." But it was already too late. The damage was done. The line had been crossed, and there was no going back. I couldn't pretend nothing had happened. I couldn't pretend I wasn't feeling something too. I stood up, trying to steady myself. "I think you should go to bed." He nodded silently, standing up as well, but his eyes never left mine. And as he walked away, I realized something. This was the moment when everything changed. There was no turning back now. The lines had blurred, and I had no idea where this was headed. But I knew one thing for sure. It was a dangerous path to follow. The next day, things were quiet between Jesse and me, too quiet. The words we had exchanged the night before lingered between us like an unspoken tension, thick and suffocating. Neither of us knew how to address it. I didn't want to confront him, and I sure as hell didn't want to admit that everything had changed. But I could feel it. An invisible wall had gone up between us, one that neither of us was willing to break down. I kept myself busy, throwing my focus into the little things, anything to keep my mind from spiraling. But Jesse wasn't making it easy. It wasn't just what he had said. It was the way he looked at me. Every time our eyes met, there was something there, something I couldn't quite put into words. And every time it happened, it was like an electric current ran through me, a jolt of something I didn't know how to deal with. Then, as the days passed, Jesse started acting distant. He avoided me like he was ashamed of what had happened, like he was trying to pretend it had never occurred, that he had never said what he said. He was cold, distant, and it stung. It felt like a slap in the face. It was a Saturday afternoon when everything changed again. I was sitting on the porch, enjoying the warm weather, when I heard footsteps approaching. I didn't need to look up to know who it was. Jesse. He stood there for a moment, hands stuffed into his pockets, staring at the ground like he was weighing his options. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. I set my book down and nodded, unsure of what he wanted to say. He sat down beside me, leaving just enough space to keep things from feeling too close. It was awkward, the silence thick with things left unsaid. I could feel the tension crackling between us. Finally, Jesse spoke. "I've been thinking about what happened," he said, looking down at his hands. "And I know I messed up. I shouldn't have said all that stuff. I don't want to make you uncomfortable. I never meant to do that." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Jesse, I don't know what you want me to say," I admitted. "It's complicated. What you said, it crossed a line. And I don't know how to go back from that." He nodded, his expression filled with regret. "I get it. I don't know why I said it." I guess I was confused. I didn't want to hide how I felt, but now I realize it was wrong. I felt a strange mix of relief and confusion. Relief because at least he was acknowledging what had happened, but confusion because I still didn't know how I felt about it. I couldn't just brush it off like nothing had changed, because something had changed. Something had shifted. Something that felt real. Something that felt dangerous. We sat there in silence, neither of us knowing how to fill the space between us. Then Jesse spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just don't want things to be weird between us. I don't want to lose whatever this is." My heart pounded. The way he said it, so vulnerable, so uncertain, made me want to reach out, to tell him everything would be okay. But it wouldn't. Everything wasn't fine. And it wouldn't be. I stood up suddenly, needing distance. "I think we need some time," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "We both do." Jesse stood too, looking like he wanted to say more, but didn't know how. "Okay," he said quietly. "I understand. I hope things don't stay weird." I turned away, not trusting myself to speak. I didn't know what was going to happen next. I didn't know if this was the end of it, or if we were both just trying to pretend that everything was normal when it clearly wasn't. But one thing was for sure, nothing would ever be the same again. The weeks after that conversation felt like walking on eggshells. Jesse and I barely spoke. And when we did, it was as if we were both trying too hard to keep things casual, pretending everything was fine when deep down I knew it wasn't. The distance between us grew, and with it, the awkwardness that hung in the air like a thick fog. Then one night, everything changed again. My husband was away on another business trip, and I was home alone. It wasn't unusual, but this time Jesse was acting differently. He was quieter, more withdrawn. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was waiting for something. I didn't know what, but the tension between us was undeniable. I was in the kitchen making dinner when Jesse walked in. This time, he didn't hesitate. He stood in the doorway, watching me. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice almost urgent. I stopped what I was doing, my heart skipping a beat. I nodded, even though I wasn't sure I was ready to have this conversation again. "What about?" He stepped closer, his gaze intense. "I need to get something off my chest." My pulse quickened, a sense of dread creeping up my spine. The last time he had said something like that, everything had spiraled out of control. Was this going to be the same? "I've been thinking about us," he said, his eyes never leaving mine. "About everything that happened. I know you're probably tired of hearing me talk about it, but I can't stop thinking about it. I can't stop thinking about you." My breath caught in my throat. "Jesse, no." But he cut me off. "Please, just hear me out." He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "I don't know what this is, but it's more than I can ignore. I know it's messed up. I know we shouldn't be having this conversation, but I can't help it." I froze as he moved into my space. His closeness made my heart race, and I could feel my palms sweating. I wanted to push him away, to tell him to leave, but part of me didn't want to move. Part of me didn't want him to go. "I know this is wrong," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I can't stop thinking about you. I can't stop thinking about the way we've been connected, the way I feel around you. And I need to know if you feel the same way, if you've thought about it, even just once." I didn't know what to say. The words were stuck in my throat. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. This wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't supposed to be real. But here he was, standing in front of me, his eyes full of something I couldn't deny, something I hadn't wanted to admit to myself. I stepped back, shaking my head. "Jesse, stop. This isn't what you think. It's not right." But he wasn't listening. His hand reached out, brushing against mine, and for a brief moment, I felt a jolt of electricity pass between us. "I'm not going to stop," he said softly, his voice full of conviction. "And I don't want you to stop either. I can't pretend like nothing's happening anymore." My heart was pounding in my chest. I could feel the pull between us, an irresistible gravity. But I also knew what it would mean if I let it happen. I knew the consequences. The pain. The heartbreak. I pulled away more forcefully this time.
"No, Jesse.
This can't happen." He stepped back, his face falling, but there was no mistaking the frustration in his eyes. "I don't want to lose you," he said, his voice cracking. "Okay? I don't want to pretend anymore." I stood there, frozen, feeling the weight of his words settle deep in my stomach. I didn't know what to do, what to feel. All I knew was that the line had been crossed again. And now I had to decide which way to go. But in that moment, I realized something important. This wasn't just about Jesse and me. It was about the choices I made, the boundaries I set or didn't set. It was about who I wanted to be and who I wanted to become. And as I walked away, my heart heavy with uncertainty, I knew one thing for sure. This story wasn't over. Not by a long shot.